Welcome back. Welcome to Rotor Ramble. I'm Danny Engesser.
And I'm Kevin Barber. Today we are talking about remote ID.
Yay! That's right, Kevin. We are talking about remote ID. Today is September 16th, the day that remote ID goes into effect, notwithstanding the delayed enforcement announcement that came this week. Trying to put today's show together has been a little bit of a challenge because it's been a moving target the past couple of weeks. We've been waiting for some type of announcement from the FAA if there was going to be a delay, and turns out kind of, but kind of not. So we'll try to. If you don't know, if this is your first time hearing about remote ID, surprise! We're going to try to go through the FAA's page section by section, kind of literally read it down the page and kind of give you our thoughts on it as needed, kind of off the cuff on all this, and then we'll go into the announcement of the delayed enforcement that's spoiler alert, 6 months away. So on March 16th.
Yeah, simply put, remote ID is just the FAA calls it a digital license plate. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more, but it's basically broadcasting an identification with your serial number, your drone's serial number, and it's broadcasting it out supposedly to anyone with a capable cell phone or device that can receive that signal in Bluetooth or Wi-Fi with a special app that would decode that information.
That's right. It's we've known it's been coming, and 3 years ago it seems so far off, and now it's upon us. So ready or not, like it or not, it's here, and time to start complying. Or for those of you that there are definitely those that are saying they will not be complying for whatever reason, but we are going to go through the rule and just kind of talk about it, and just to educate, if you haven't heard about it and you want to, and you haven't ever been to the Blade page to learn about it, we're going to kind of go through it. So we are on. Are you ready for this, Kevin? Should we start going through the page? Okay, so
let's do it.
We are on FAA.gov/UAS/getting_started/remote_ID. That is the page we're going to kind of go through. So if you want to bring that up at home, on your phone or on your computer, and follow along, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we will try to read it kind of word for word, so you don't have to have the page up, but we'll go through this. And we'll, first section is just a couple paragraphs introduction. It says remote ID, remote identification, remote ID is coming. Are you ready? I am not ready. And I'm sure most of you are not. And yes, we will be
partly ready.
We will be interjecting comments like that as we go through this. And if you want, Kevin, we can kind of trade off reading, whichever works here. So drones are fundamentally changing aviation, and the FAA is committed to working towards fully integrating drones into the national airspace, or the NAS. Beginning September 16th, today, 2023, all drone pilots who are required to register their UAS must operate in accordance with the rule on remote ID. Safety and security are top priorities for the FAA, and remote ID for drones is crucial to our integration efforts.
So right there, Danny, was one of the key points there.
Yep.
All pilots who are required to register their UAS or drones. So that includes, who does that include, Danny?
So that'd be anybody that has a drone that is 250 grams or above. And if you are Part 107, that's basically all of you. So
all drones for Part 107.
All drones for Part, even sub 250 gram drones, which once you add we'll get into it, but add anything that broadcasts a remote ID signal to your drone will put it over probably anyway. So
that's been a bit of a point of confusion about, that's one of the common mistakes or common misconceptions that people have, is that they don't have to register their drone if it's under 250 grams. But it's only for hobby flights, hobby users.
Yeah, and it's deeply tied into the remote ID is deeply tied into registration too. Like, maybe we just said that, but that's a way to look at it as, do I need remote ID? Well, did you need to register your drone? Then yeah, you need to worry about it. Going on, it says, what is it? Remote ID is the ability of a drone in flight to provide identification and location information that can be received by other parties through a broadcast signal. We've learned that could be through a cell phone app. I'm sure any type of computer could probably run a similar app. Continuing on.
Yeah, pretty much.
Go ahead.
Pretty much anything that receives a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi signal, theoretically. So you could see Raspberry Pis or laptops being able to do that, as well as obviously cell phones. I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe some custom-made appliances coming up for law enforcement, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's always been a surprise for me that this was needed at all, because like DJI, they had a technology called Aeroscope that could pick up, DJI drones anyway. And I've heard other drones, and that may or may not be accurate, but I'm still a little confused on why Aeroscope wasn't enough, especially when, probably most of the drones out there are DJI anyway. So, it says, why do we need it? Remote ID lays the foundation of the safety and security groundwork needed for complex drone operations. Remote ID also helps the FAA, law enforcement, and other federal agencies locate the control station when a drone appears to be flying in an unsafe manner or where it is not allowed to fly. And that's kind of the end of that introduction. So that would be in a case, let's say, a football game or a public gathering. There's definitely concerns about more and more drones flying around, that type of situation. Just recently, there was somebody convicted of, flying over a football game? I'm forgetting, within the last week or so.
I think it was Cleveland Browns, if I remember right. Could definitely be wrong on that.
Yeah, and I believe that person had there was like 40 hours of community service and a year of probation.
Something along those lines, yeah.
Like that.
I thought maybe there was a fine involved too, but maybe that's wrong.
Yeah, that could be the case. But know that, and I'm gonna guess remote ID may or may not have ever been used there. Guessing this person probably didn't even know enough to put ID on their drone, but who knows? I'm just speculating there.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thought too, is what happens if somebody, and maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit, but remote ID, it requires you to register with the FAA your remote ID serial number. That's how they're going to tie it back to you. But what happens if somebody doesn't register that? So maybe it'll still provide the what do they call it? The ground station location, basically the controller location. So maybe that's enough to find who's operating it. But if you don't tie it to your name, how is somebody going to know?
Yeah, it's I know there's various ways that they can figure this stuff out if there's some, yeah, and the remote ID, bad actors trying to do things intentionally are more than likely not going to be complying if they have the option too. So,
yeah, that can really get me started on a tangent here.
Should I continue on
We'll
reading?
Save that for later. Yeah, let's go for it.
How to be remote ID ready is the next section. There are 3 ways drone pilots can meet identification requirements of the remote ID rule. First bullet point says, operate a standard remote ID drone that broadcasts identification and location information of the drone and control station. A standard remote ID drone is one that is produced with built-in remote ID broadcast capabilities in accordance with the remote ID rules requirements. So standard remote ID is essentially, so if you were to buy a drone off the shelf today, it's supposed to be remote ID compliant, like a DJI Mavic type drone. Manufacturers had a deadline last year of any drone that was being sold needed to be remote ID compliant. Originally, it was supposed to be in the fall of last year, and that got delayed till I think December. That first bullet point talks about standard remote ID versus just remote ID. There's two different types. So the next bullet point talks about remote ID in general. A remote operate a drone. Continuing on how to be remote ID ready. Operate a drone with a remote ID broadcast module, which is an add-on device to your drone that would satisfy the requirement. A broadcast module is a device that broadcasts identification and location information about the drone and its takeoff location in accordance with the remote ID rules requirements. The broadcast module can be added to a drone to retrofit it with remote ID capabilities. Pilots operating a drone with remote ID broadcast module must be able to see their drone at all times during flight. And the last bullet point, go ahead.
So that's one thing that we did get with the remote ID rule was there were some things that were actually added in. I think that was back in 2020 or 2021. I think it was 2021, right? When it was passed. Anyway, they did give us, they did allow things like flight at night, and are paving the way for beyond visual line of sight, BV loss. But those are stipulated to be with a standard remote ID module, built-in remote ID, not with a add-on. I could be wrong about the night operations with that, but if you're flying beyond visual line of sight, you do need to have the standard remote ID.
The third bullet and last bullet point of this section talks about operate without remote ID equipment at a FAA recognized identification area, or a FRIA, F-R-I-A, sponsored by community-based organizations or educational institutions. FRIAs are the only locations where UAS drones and radio-controlled airplanes may operate without broadcasting a remote ID message elements. So it's essentially, if you were let's say a university, for example, I think could apply for a FRIA. It's essentially they submit a form to the FAA designating a controlled space, like a big open field, right? And they say that we want to designate this as a FRIA, where it's a zone you can fly within this zone and not have to operate with remote ID requirements. And different organizations are applying for that. Individuals are not allowed to apply for this, so you can't register your backyard as one, unfortunately. Many people have tried that, but the idea is that it would be coming from an organization. And I think the FAA has said they're only going to do about 4,000 of these nationwide. And they're going through the approval process now. The next section says get remote ID ready. Which drone pilots must comply with the rule? Beginning September 16th, 2023, and this may change here a little bit, some of this information. All drone pilots required to register, including those who fly for recreation, business, or public safety, must operate their drone in accordance with the rule on remote ID. And they did update this page. So it says, please note, FAA extends remote ID enforcement date 6 months. So we're going to kind of get into that a little sooner than I thought. Drone pilots who are unable to comply with the broadcast requirement of the remote ID rule will now have until March 16th, 2024, so 6 months, to equip their aircraft. After that date, operators could face fines and suspension or revocation of pilot certificates. Part 107. In making this decision, the FAA recognizes the unanticipated issues that some operators are experiencing finding some remote identification broadcast modules. Manufacturers are still trying to get these modules out to the public. supply is very limited. We know of some people who have ordered some and even tested some. There's a great kind of rundown of about 9 different modules that a company called Pilot Institute recently did that I watched, and they cover various types of modules. So some of them are self-powered. Some of them also needed to be plugged in to your drone for power. And so they kind of go through those different types of modules, and I encourage you to check that out. Maybe we can link to that video. And but they also, I would say, Pilot Institute, they're a great resource, and they're fighting for us too, the drone operators, where they actually did write a letter to the FAA after having a survey go public with thousands of people responding to how ready the community was. So we like to think that they helped get this extension in place by their information gathering and their letter writing. I don't know, I forget if I read this paragraph or not. Drone pilots can meet this deadline by purchasing a standard remote ID equipped drone from a manufacturer, or purchasing a remote ID broadcast module, which can be affixed to existing drones that do not have remote ID equipment. Drone pilots who do not have remote ID ready drones may opt to fly within a FAA recognized identification area or FRIA.
If they can get to one.
Yeah, I currently don't know where there one is in this area or anywhere in Iowa. For those,
I did see a list. The closest one to us, I think, is up in northern Iowa. I think around Mason City. There's one, if I remember right. There is a map available, the same map as the facility grid that you can use to find the airspace designations, and they do have a list. It's pretty sparse, especially when you're talking hundreds of miles between them. And so if you just want to go out and fly your drone, teach your kids how to fly a drone that doesn't have remote ID, that's where you've got to go. You got to get in the car and drive.
So what you're saying is road trip.
Road trip. Drone road trip.
Yay. Next section talks about registering drones. Recreational drone pilots may register once and apply the registration number to all the devices listed within their inventory. During registration, you must list the serial numbers or number of each standard remote ID drone and or the remote ID broadcast module. If you use a remote ID broadcast module, the remote ID serial number attached to the module must be listed for each non-standard remote ID drone you add to your inventory. This will permit you to move the module from one standard remote ID drone to another, so long as each of the drones, make, model, are listed within the same inventory. This is not
the case for Part 107 pilots, who must register each individual device, standard remote ID or remote ID broadcast module, separately within their inventory, and each device will get a unique serial number.
And this is a big contention point for me because, and I'm just speaking from my own personal situation. I have 8 drones that would be considered remote ID, would need remote ID on them if I were to fly them starting tomorrow, or today, I guess, right? That goes into effect.
Starting today.
Only 2 of those 8 are remote ID compliant with a firmware update. And the others are perfectly flying drones, perfectly safe drones, now would require a module to fly. Currently, prices on these modules are really not getting much cheaper than about $100 a pop. And they go up from there. So, I mean, I would be looking at $600 to $1,000 to upgrade my fleet with remote ID modules, should I go that course. At this point,
but if you're flying as a hobbyist, you can have one broadcast module and share it amongst your drones.
Correct. But I've registered all my drones as Part 107 drones, and that's I would say 100% of the time is I'm flying under Part 107 rules. So it's not, yeah, that's, I would want a better solution as a, I mean, basically what I'm looking at now is I'll probably either just not fly my drones and display them behind me, or sell them to, you know, they're perfect. Like I said, it's really frustrating because these drones work great. They've been working safely and fine. And now there's this requirements. I mean, you look at requirements. I come from the TV world too. So I'm looking at the DTV transition that we had, what was it, 2009? And even in that situation, you know, is this big change where we went from analog broadcast to digital broadcast, and everybody got a voucher or a certificate or something to get 2 free digital TV boxes, you know. I don't know if you remember doing that, but it would allow your old TVs to pick up the digital signal of the modern world, and to be forced into paying. I mean, I don't, as a small business owner and a poor drone flyer, I can't afford to pay $600 to $1,000 to update all my drones. So it's just, I'll be just flying for my Part 107 operations. I'll just be flying the 2 that I can. And I don't know what'll happen with the rest. So just a big frustration for me personally. I don't know about you, Kevin. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, it's frustrating that they make two different classes of, the exact same drone as flown by a hobbyist, who's arguably less trained. I mean, presumably less trained. I know that's not a fair statement really to make, but not flying professionally gives you actually more lenience than flying professionally. You would think it would be the opposite, but really there's no difference with the drones that we're flying. We're flying the same drones. Hobbyist can fly with a add-on broadcast module, Part 107, and share that amongst their drones. Part 107 cannot, and that's a frustrating thing, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I personally, I did actually just order a RemoteID module, broadcast module, to add on. I'm not sure which single drone it's going to go on. Probably one of my FPV drones, because it's going to actually give me some GPS capabilities to the drone that I don't have currently. So a little bit of a silver lining, but then I could. You
said that was the flight test one.
Yeah, that's the flight test one.
I saw the video on that, and that it looks. I mean, I liked how compact and lightweight it was versus some of these other ones I've been seeing. So I'll be curious to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to have some help soldering in the GPS to the flight controller, that sort of thing. Yeah. Because I'm more of a buy and fly guy. But and I did purchase a Mavic 3 Pro, largely because RemoteID was coming and I wanted to be prepared. I want to be able to make money with my drone, and I want to follow the rules as best I can. So I did purchase that. I'm very happy with the decision. But interestingly, I can't even find that drone on my phone with my Apple iPhone. RemoteID doesn't work on it with that drone, just because of the standards. So that's kind of an interesting thing too. Probably they'll eventually work. I think some of the other broadcast modules that use Wi-Fi, it would work potentially, but I first got the drone, turned it on. I'm like, okay, let's just see what this RemoteID does, and Nothing. Couldn't find it. It was interesting.
Yeah, I've been hearing that the Apple apps are, for whatever, I think it's just the Bluetooth technology maybe is not
Yeah, I think
as
it's Bluetooth.
sensitive as like an Android app that would record this information.
I think it's the, if I remember right, I believe it's the version of Bluetooth. It's the latest Bluetooth. What is it? Bluetooth 6, I think.
Okay.
But yeah.
And another frustration of mine is too, they talk about this being for safety, and but when I'm taking a already compact drone and adding additional weight to this drone that could throw off its balance, or the device could fall off the drone, strike propeller and make the drone crash, or emit a broadcast signal that could in theory interfere with the operation of the drone itself. Those are concerns of mine too, and I feel like we're not necessarily making things safer. We're adding complexities to an already safe drone, and putting a tracking device on your car is not going to make it a safer vehicle. It's going to be able to be tracked, but it's not going to make it a safer vehicle. So, all right, should we continue on?
Yeah, let's continue on. I can go ahead and keep reading for you if you want.
Sure.
So before you get started, ensure your device has a FAA-approved remote ID declaration of compliance. So what that means is you can look up your drone on the on the FAA's website. They've got a link here in this page to the Declaration of Compliance website, and they do have a list, and it's fortunately enough updating fairly regularly with drones that are capable or approved, I should say, of broadcasting remote ID. There have actually been a couple that have gone on there and have actually subsequently dropped off. So those have also been revoked. It's probably a good idea to also know if your drone's been revoked from that list. So and then the other thing is checking your serial number and having that match with the manufacturer. I actually ran into this with my Mavic 3 that I purchased. It was kind of difficult to find the right serial number and put it in the right format for the website. So it was a little bit of a challenge. It took me a little while to get it registered when I did. So that's something to know.
Is it true? I was hearing that for Part 107 operators that they were going to be allowing you to update your serial number through the end of the year without a change, like a fee, a $5 change fee.
Yep, that's what I understand. Since this had remote ID on when I purchased it, I was able to just go ahead and this was the one-time registration. I said yes, it has remote ID.
Yeah.
And then I put in that remote ID serial number. It does check it against its list or algorithm of known serial numbers. So you can look on that website and it'll say serial numbers 0001 through 99999, however the manufacturer does it. So then you can kind of get a clue as to how it's supposed to go in there. If you've previously, go ahead. I'm sorry, Danny.
And I might be jumping ahead on some of this stuff, but I also had a thought too that this is something that I feel I don't have a straight answer on yet. I've been hearing both things from both reliable sources. And I'd really like to hear a more succinct answer from the FAA about this, is that, and it's about it's for Part 107 operators. And maybe you have a bit clearer understanding of this than I do, but my understanding is that to comply with the rule, if I have an old, let's say Inspire 1 Pro, and I want to use that for commercial uses again starting today, I would be compliant by putting a module on there. Now, I've heard it would not be compliant. I've also heard it would be compliant. Do you have any thoughts on that, or have you heard
My
definite answer to that?
understanding, yeah, my understanding is that it is compliant to add on a module. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said this whole section about registering your drone with a module for Part 107. So that's where again you've got to have the separate modules. If they were talking about standard remote ID, each drone that is manufactured with standard remote ID obviously will have its own unique um, serial number and identification that it's broadcasting. So my take on it is they wouldn't have that section in there if they didn't intend for 107 pilots to be flying with the add-on modules.
And that has been my interpretation of that. The other thing that I've heard recently is there's something, and I'm probably calling this wrong, but like a catch-22 thing with home built Part 107 drones and remote ID, and it's a little bit more intricate than I want to get into right now. But I've been listening to like I think it's the FPV Freedom Coalition talking about this recently. With typically a lot of FPV drones are considered home built drones,
Yeah.
And again, I don't feel adequately informed to go into it much, but there's some point of contention on to as to I think it's some of the FAA's rules that are conflicting with each other or something regarding that aspect of Part 107 and home built drones and modules. So something to maybe revisit, unless you want to speak.
Yeah, no, that was a discussion I didn't really. I know we talked about that several months ago. I think when it first came up, and I was not seeing it the same way that others were seeing it. So I don't think that's the case, but again, they're already treating different classes of uses for drones differently, even though they're the same drones. I know I've got both of my FPV drones registered as under Part 107. So, that's going to have to be worked out, I guess, and hopefully that'll be clarified in the future.
Yeah. And I know they already. I'll just touch on it since we kind of were already given the update of the extension in this page, but just a clarification is that delay is for those of you who cannot get modules yet for your drones. If you already have remote ID built into your drone, it is considered that you are ready for remote ID and that you should be complying with it at this point. It's that delay in enforcement. They haven't postponed remote ID. They've postponed the enforcement of it because people are not being able to get modules for these drones that are not standard remote ID compliant. Is that your
So
interpretation?
if you've got a module, if you've got a module already, you are to be using it. And standard remote IDs devices, so drones that have standard remote ID or built in, part of the specification for that is that the drones are not supposed to be able to launch without having remote ID working properly, which actually brings up a whole other question for me about what about flying indoors? That's a common thing. And you're not going to get a GPS lock flying indoors. So
that was definitely an argument when this whole remote ID was being proposed. They were like, well, what about this situation where you're not going to get GPS? And that shouldn't mean that you should be like, part of the rule is you're not supposed to be able to disable remote ID. Well, now this is a good place where your old drone might actually come in handy because you can take the module off and I mean, the
Yeah,
modules actually won't restrict your flight, which is, a where your remote ID, not standard remote ID, but the module add-on can't have that. I mean, there might be modules that could do it. I don't know, but to my knowledge, most modules are not going to be able to stop the flight of your non-compliant drone.
Yeah, if they were able to restrict you from taking off, then they would actually probably be classified as standard remote ID in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So,
are we down the next section, recreational flyers?
Yeah, let's go to recreational flyers. Recreational flyers will need to add each standard remote ID and or broadcast module to their inventory. So this is just basically going through how to do that. I'm assuming you don't want to read through all of this.
Yeah, if you want to know how to do that, go to that page that we will flash on the screen here again, if we remember to throw that in. But we said it at the beginning of the podcast. So we can skip all the way down. Choose a type of... then talked about editing existing registration. We kind of touched on that a little bit for part 107. Yeah, so that's kind of just a step-by-step how to do that. Registering a new device, pretty much the same as the old way. It's just a matter of putting that serial number in for remote ID. I think is the only new thing. You have to specify if your drone is remote ID compliant or not, and then put in that ID. It's going on my memory.
So this part's just a graphic kind of explaining and going through again the different ways you can meet remote ID. So, as we mentioned, there's the standard remote ID drones where it's built in, and that's broadcasting. This is where I was originally, and I'm still a little bit unclear. It says Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But I think it's actually Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So that's kind of a little bit of a unknown.
This may or may not be related, but I was watching, I don't know if you saw Joshua Bardwell's video where he was testing that flight test module. Yeah. Okay. So he made the point that it was actually, that module is actually broadcasting two different, was it frequencies of Bluetooth at the same time? Because he saw it actually show up twice on his app.
Well, and even within Wi-Fi, there's Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz and 5.6.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's all these different standards. It's kind of interesting that they don't say it has to do both or one or the other. Because they are very different types of radios.
That's right. Anything else in that?
So this is just kind of reiterating, the other way is the add-on module. And again, I don't see, Danny, where this doesn't distinguish in this particular case that Part 107 cannot fly under an add-on module, broadcast module, they call it.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, Part 107 is not restricted from flying in a FRIA. But this just kind of goes through and summarizes the different things. You also see here, I don't think it was correct when I said at night. I didn't mean to imply that you couldn't fly at night with a broadcast module, because I don't see that. But here I do specifically see that it is visual line of sight. You're not going to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight without a standard remote ID.
Which is no different than the current rule without remote ID, right?
That's correct. And
without a waiver.
And I think, yeah, and you'd have to have a waiver anyway, at least at this point. I don't know if that's going to change at all in the future. It is, as I hear, getting easier to get beyond visual line of sight waivers. but it's still part of the rules that you cannot fly beyond visual line of sight.
Should we jump to session ID?
Yeah, go ahead.
Session ID. In the future, operators of standard remote ID drones may be able to choose between broadcasting their drone's ID, remote ID compliant serial number, or a session ID. The FAA is developing a strategy for assignment of session ID to drone pilots and will consider existing policies when developing the session ID policy. Session ID will be uniquely identifiable, such that law enforcement and the FAA can correlate each session ID to a specific drone's registration, but this ability will not be publicly available. The FAA will seek public comment on the session ID policy prior to finalizing it.
This is one of those sections where I'm going to kind of gloss over it because I can't. I've been having a hard time interpreting what a session ID is going to be used for. I don't know. Do you have any insight on that?
The only thing I could think of is, and currently with more recent DJI drones, I think like the Air 2S and the Mavic 3s probably have this, is there's a place where you can put in, I forget what the field, there's a field in there that says like, you could have it say your name or your company or something. I would imagine it could maybe be, and I'm totally speculating here, so I could be wrong, but it could be maybe a one-time use thing that says, like, let's say it's a festival. I'm the official video guy for this festival or something. I don't know. It sounds like it's a substitute for the serial number. The question is would that be like a user-friendly name, or is it some other number that we don't know about?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good thought. It could be for like, maybe another example is flying in a TFR, temporary flight restriction.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you're granted, say, a special number. You know, you've put in a request for a waiver or an authorization, and maybe you're granted the special session ID number that you have to put in. I don't know. I guess we'll wait and find out what that becomes. Remote ID background. The FAA's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, NPRM, on remote identification of unmanned aircraft systems was published on December 31st, 2019. The FAA received over 53,000 comments on the NPRM during the 60-day comment period following publication. The FAA reviewed all the comments and considered them when writing the final rule. The final rule was published in the Federal Register on January 15th, 2021, with an original effective date of March 16th, 2021. Corrections made to the rule and published in the Federal Register on March 10th, 2021, delayed the effective date to April 21st, 2021. The deadline for operational compliance is September 16th, again today, 2023. That is basically the end of that page. Was there anything on there was another page we were going to talk about the delayed enforcement. I don't know if there's any other details on that page since they talked about it kind of.
I think I got to the wrong page here. Extends. Yeah, this is pretty much just a summary of what was already in there. Again, they outline that operators could face fines and suspension or revocation of a pilot certificate. No specificity on how much those fines might be. But yeah, it's just reiterating that they had unanticipated issues of trying to get people to invent a standard that wasn't even, when they came out with this rule, there wasn't even a remote ID standard in place up until almost a month before the deadline for manufacturers. There wasn't even a remote ID standard, a specification. So, I don't know why. I would say it was unanticipated to some people. To other people, I think it was completely anticipated.
Yeah. That's for sure. Another aspect we may want to talk about, just touch on it. We can do a whole other episode about this sometime. Is remote ID is deeply tied into as well for operations over people, which you may see abbreviated as what OOP. You down with OOP?
Yeah, you know me.
And there's day in and day out, both Kevin and I see videos of flights over people. Both of us know that, or speculate that a lot of those flights are not being compliant, and part of that probably is weight of the drone, and part of it's remote ID. But that just, if you're getting into flights over people, just do a search for FAA flights over people and find out what those rules are, because I think a lot of people misinterpret what they are. Once you add, let's say you have a drone that's maybe sub 250 grams, then you got to ask yourself, okay, now is it remote ID compliant? Is it still going to be sub 250 grams when I have propeller guards on there and add a remote ID module, things like that? We won't get into that too deeply, but things to consider if you're looking at doing that kind of flight, that those are tied in together.
Yeah, presumably, like the new Mavic, the new minis that are coming out, hopefully they're going to have remote ID one way or the other. Hopefully they'll bring back, I'm trying to remember, Danny, do you remember, are they retrofitting or doing updates for the
old
minis that are the older ones?
I don't think so. I don't know for sure about the 3. I have a Mini 1. And even though I've registered it for Part 107, I don't know if I've ever used it for Part 107, but I would need the way I have it now with just, it's got maybe 3 stickers on it and I put some motor caps on there. That's thrown it over 250 grams right there. Now it's required. Well, it would have been regardless of weight, because if it's registered on Part 107, if I'm using it for Part 107 operations, I would have to have a module on that. And now that's adding extra weight to an already super light drone. But I don't think they're going to be updating the firmware on that one. It's so old. Still runs great. Still is perfectly safe drone. But yeah, I don't see them updating the firmware on that one.
So just to sort of answer my own question here, I did look up Mini, and there is the DJI Mini 3 and the Mini 3 Pro have been added for the Declaration of Compliance. This is the FAA's Declaration of Compliance website here, and
really the original Mini.
I searched for the Mini, and it was only this one's the Drone Tag Mini, which is a broadcast module. Okay. Yeah. So definitely the Mini 3 and the Mini 3 Pro are compliant.
And some of these already. DJI drones, they were going to be getting updates in December is what DJI was saying. And that's one of the many reasons I think the FAA has also talked about delaying the compliance, because those drones currently can't, while they will be updated to support standard remote ID, they don't currently have that. It will not have that ability until December.
Yeah, and as I understand it, it's going to be the most of the Mavic 2 series, most of that line. And I even heard that the Phantom 4, I believe it's the Pro V2. I'm hoping that the Phantom 4 Pro is included on that. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be, but I certainly hope it is. That would save me, $600 on modules.
Yeah, it seems like they should be able to go back so far on these updates. Like they really, it seems like it's more of a business decision than anything for them. I refuse to believe that they couldn't make these drones broadcast remote ID.
Well, they're definitely broadcasting other things. The control link is 2.4 gigahertz, which is Wi-Fi. So you'd think you'd be able to add a little ID in with there, and there's already they actually call it remote ID even though it's not the FAA's remote ID. What we're talking about, it's what DJI called it remote ID, is actually built in. And broadcasting for things for their you said it earlier, Danny. I'm blanking on it.
Aeroscope, is that what you're talking about?
Aeroscope.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So where you can put your name in your drone. Thank you. So hopefully, I mean, that's I guess I'm going to work under the assumption that it will be added and will be compliant sometime in December for those drones, and presumably I can keep flying them under the extension here without getting fined.
Yeah, even
though I'm not in compliance.
But we did. Go ahead.
Most of my daily drone work is being done through the Mavic 3 Pro now, so it's actually been a while since I've flown the trusty old Phantom 4.
Dusted off. We haven't, we've talked more about the regulation side of things, but we could maybe touch on a little bit the concerns of pilots too with remote ID. I know there's concern of security, like a lone pilot goes out and they're doing, let's say, a house photography for for realty shoot or something, and worried about now they're broadcasting their location, and someone who's angry, an angry neighbor could come out, or even someone who's just out looking for free equipment. They're like, oh, there's someone with a drone. Let's
wait for them to land.
And or whatever. It's a legitimate concern. There's also people who say your broadcast, depending upon the broadcast module, isn't going to broadcast far enough to be of a concern. I think, was it FLITE TEST? They clocked the distance on their remote ID module to, I want to say between 1,000 and 2,000 feet. I don't know what the average, maybe I've got that wrong, but it's going to depend on the module, I think, the antennas on those and the signal it broadcasts, as to how far that signal goes. But it's not tying into any. Originally, the FAA wanted it to be tied into a cellular connection that would go back to a mainframe, I think, or something. No. And that's not happening.
Network.
Yeah, network ID. Is that what was it called? Or something?
It was networked remote ID.
Okay. And that's
I believe there are some countries that have implemented that as remote ID, that have required that. So I do know that some of the modules that are being sold out there do have an add-on for network remote ID. I think that's for other countries. Hopefully not for here.
Yeah, and you think about all the rural shooting. Go out in the country and you're getting, harvest photos or video or whatever, and cellular service is becoming more common out there, but it's sometimes hard to get any signal at all, and so to have that be a requirement for takeoff is kind of a non-starter for a lot of folks.
I was in Alaska, this summer. I go up almost every summer for a week, and had my drone with me, and I could get a great drone signal. I can't get anything for a cell signal. Mm-hmm. In a lot of those areas, it's not that unusual to not have a cell signal. And even this background behind me was from near Rocky Mountain National Park. I didn't have a cell signal when I took this photo. And that's not that rural. You can see you can see the town basically from this photo if you look carefully enough, but I didn't have a cell signal.
Yeah. Other concerns you remember hearing about those? I mean, we touched on some of the things.
Well, the pilot location. So the standard remote ID is required to broadcast the pilot's, the ground station location, or the pilot's current location, and presumably updated. I'm not sure if it has a specific requirement on how frequently to update the location. The broadcast module is required to broadcast the takeoff location. So presumably you could take off and then walk around with the drone, move your location, and have that be compliant. However, with the standard remote ID, it would require the current location of the pilot, and that's been concerning to a lot of people just from safety, as we mentioned. I personally, in my experience, I've only had one incident where somebody was, I wouldn't even say aggressive, but he was definitely, concerned about what I was doing with the drone. And in that case, I was able to chat with him. I told him what was going on, and he pulled the standard line. Whoa, well, I'm just going to shoot down the drone, and let's not go into that. But but I actually was able to talk to the guy for a little while, and he was saying, I ended up turning him and saying, he was like, oh, I've been thinking about getting a drone. I kind of want to get one. That's not always going to be the case.
Yeah, you might make a hater into a new flyer.
Yeah.
Go ahead. We
definitely have there's certainly different areas that I don't think you would get the same reaction. I personally haven't flown in those situations. I could see them coming up where, maybe somebody just is flat out against it. I guess I would, in that case, I would hope that they just don't know about remote ID. And I'm guessing that if they think they can shoot down a drone, they probably don't know about remote ID. Mm-hmm. So that's the one silver lining, I think, there.
Yeah, and speaking of those that do and do not know about remote ID, I'll be curious to see how. I mean, I think there's already education in place from the FAA to officials like police and stuff. But I'll be curious to see how fast they get educated on that, and when that's actually going to be. Even though these millions of drone pilots are broadcasting this signal, is anybody listening? I know in certain places they will be, but like 90% of the places you're going to be flying, my guess is no one's going to be listening anyway. If I'm flying in my backyard, which technically I have to have remote ID broadcasting from, no one's going to be close enough. I mean, if you have maybe a neighbor with an app, maybe, but again, them even knowing about it or caring is a whole nother thing.
Well, my neighbor happens to have an alarm whenever I fly the drone, and it's called his dog.
Yeah.
So he knows. He doesn't shut the dog up, but he
remote dog ID.
Yeah, exactly. So. But I mean, it's probably going to be one of those things. If you can hear the drone, if you can't hear the drone, you may not be able to get it on remote ID. So I don't know. It's kind of a silly. It's silly in some ways.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we've had this conversation for a long time, and I'm just of two. I'm on the fence about it all. I know there's definitely an important side of this, but a lot of it is overreach as far as I'm concerned, and really is kind of ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Will I comply? Yes, I'll comply, or I won't be flying the drones that are not compliant. but it's doesn't change the fact that I think a lot of this is just um, an extra overreach that doesn't need to be there. My opinion on that, but do you have anything else you want to touch
Well,
on?
I think the biggest for me the silliest thing about the whole thing is it's not going to effectively catch the people. You know, they say it's for security. People that break the laws are going to break the laws.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to them if they've got remote ID. Drones are a technology that have been around for years. RC airplanes for what 30, 40, 50 years for RC planes. That's not a technology that you can, if you want to get a drone and do something, or if you want to make a drone, it's easy enough to do. You can certainly make it yourself with parts that are easily available that doesn't have remote ID. You can do with that drone what you effectively want to. If you're a criminal, you're not going to care. And so that's the ridiculous thing to me, is that it's not going to, it's only going to catch the stupid criminals.
Yeah, and there's a huge aftermarket with used drones, and that will, for those that don't choose to comply for whatever reason, that aftermarket I can see kind of taking off in like a weird way.
Yeah, from what I hear, there's 8 more drones potentially on the market. When are those coming out, Danny?
6 more.
6 more drones. Okay. All right.
So if you need a drone, I may have something for you. No. Yeah, it's just it's really frustrating. We're jumping through the hoops like I really feel for the new someone that's just coming into the hobby or the industry. We've been jumping through these hoops for years now, and it's really been challenging. As experienced as we are, as long as we've been flying and being Part 107, it's even challenging for us to keep up with these rules and to and judging by the, again, speculation, flights that are not compliant out there that we've witnessed, whether it's from an operator choosing not to follow the rules or being incompetent about the rules. Who knows what that is, but it really, the rules should be a lot simpler than they are. And we're some say that we're killing the hobby. Some people will say that, but it's just a much more challenging to get into this than it should be. Is all I have to say about it. So,
yeah, I guess the fortunate thing is the new drones that are coming out. It's pretty easy to comply, unless you just don't obviously, if you don't register your drone, you're not under compliance. But it is at least presumably broadcasting some information. So it's if you're buying a new drone, it's fairly easy to comply. But there's just a lot of muddy waters around if you've had a drone for that's not compliant.
Yeah, and that's where we come in. We may be wrapping this up, but just to say that the kind of the goal of this show, this podcast, and a Facebook group that we live in quite a bit, the Des Moines UAV Club on Facebook, the Iowa Drone Community. That's kind of our effort, and our goal is to help educate folks out there that are confused about these rules. And we don't always know the answers, but we will try to find out the answers from someone who knows better than us. So we definitely have struggled. Kevin and I go back and forth on these rules sometimes. It's like, is this how you understand it? Is this how you understand it? And sometimes it might take us a few months to kind of work through it and see like, okay, this is what it really means. And should it be that way? I don't know, but we're trying to educate. Do you have anything else we should probably close this one up and sign off.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
You know, I do want to say, as much as I've been negative on the remote ID ruling, I do plan to comply. I've got a business that, and one of the things that I pride myself on is dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and making sure that, at least for myself, I am following the rules. That is something that I do. You know, I think it's important that as much as possible, we encourage following the regulations that are out there, because it keeps our industry, our hobby, hopefully less regulated. We've had enough paranoia about it as it is, and attempts at laws that really restrict us, and that comes from people that the threat with drones is people that either are ignorant or blatantly disregarding the regulations and doing things they shouldn't with drones, and that gives the rest of us a bad name. So this is again my soapbox on this. You know, it applies in so many other things that we talk about.
Won't be the last you hear about it, I'm sure.
Definitely will not be the last. And but that's why I believe in complying the best of my abilities with it.
Yep, I agree. We want to thank you all for joining us again on this second edit. Well, I guess we're calling it episode 1. First episode, actually episode 0. The remote ID episode. Yes, the first actual discussion. It's been good. It's kind of, you know, we would have loved to get this out sooner, I'm sure, but it was such a moving target this past few weeks, and it just made sense to kind of wait until the actual day and then just talk about it. And we encourage you all to, after listening to this, if you have more questions about remote ID, definitely leave them in the comments, or you can email us. We have an email address, rotorramble@gmail.com.
It doesn't even have to be remote ID questions. It can be any questions that you have out there.
Yeah. And the standard like and subscribe, you know, on YouTube and all that. We are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X. And you can find us on most of your podcast services as well, including Spotify and Apple and Amazon and Google. So, and our website is rotorramble.com.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Next time.